There's a word that gets thrown around constantly in Barndominium design circles, and most families don't realize how much damage it causes when it's applied to the wrong layout. That word is efficient. Builders love it. Sales reps lean on it hard. And when you're sitting across from someone showing you a floor plan that promises to fit 4 bedrooms, 2 living areas, and a 3-car garage under one roof without blowing your budget, efficient sounds like exactly what you need. But here's what nobody in that room is telling you. Efficient for construction and functional for a large family living inside that construction for the next 30 years are 2 completely different things. And the gap between them is where most Barndominium regrets are born. The layout that's quietly changing that conversation. The one that structural engineers and multigenerational design specialists have started calling genuinely future-proof, isn't the open concept rectangle that dominates most Barndominium showcase accounts. It isn't the H-shaped build that went viral for looking dramatic from a drone. It's the T-shaped Barndominium. And the reason it keeps showing up in serious design conversations in 2026, the reason engineers who work specifically with large and multi-generational families keep recommending it over layouts that photograph better and sell faster, comes down to something most families never think to ask about during the design phase. What happens to this house when our family changes? Because your family will change. That's not pessimism. It's the single most overlooked variable in residential design for large households. The family that breaks ground on a Barndominium today is not the family that will be living in that Barndominium in 8 years. Children become teenagers who need genuine acoustic privacy, not just a bedroom door. Teenagers become young adults who need the illusion of independence even when finances keep them under the same roof. Parents become grandparents. Grandparents develop health needs that change how they move through a home. Investment-minded families add multi-generational tenants or adult children returning from cities where rent has become structurally impossible. The family is a living system, and a home that doesn't have the capacity to evolve with it forces that family into a brutal choice. Spend tens of thousands retrofitting a space that was never designed to flex, or absorb the daily friction of a layout that stopped fitting their life somewhere around year 3. The T-shaped layout solves this at the structural level, which is exactly why engineers trust it in ways they don't trust more visually dramatic configurations. The geometry itself is the feature. You have a primary wing, the long horizontal bar of the T, that houses your main shared living infrastructure: kitchen, great room, dining, primary suite. And then you have the vertical stem of the T extending from the center of that primary wing, creating a secondary corridor that can house an entirely separate living zone with its own entrance, its own bathroom cluster, its own morning routine that never intersects with the main wing unless the people inside it choose to intersect. On a flat plan, it looks almost too simple. In real life, that simplicity is structural genius. What that stem actually creates is something that most Barndominium layouts spend enormous square footage trying to fake and never quite achieve. Genuine zone separation without the cost and land footprint of building 2 separate structures. The families living in T-shaped Barndominiums consistently describe the stem wing as the reason this works, not because it's large, but because it's separate in the ways that actually matter. Sound, entrance, morning routines. The ability to have a disagreement, close a door, and have that door mean something architecturally, not just symbolically. And here's where it gets interesting, because the T-shape doesn't just solve today's family configuration. It anticipates the ones you haven't had yet. The specific way it does that, and why engineers call it future-proof rather than just functional, is something most builders will never explain unless you already know to ask. The future-proofing isn't marketing language. It's a structural argument. And once you understand it, you'll never look at a floor plan the same way again. Most Barndominium layouts are designed around a fixed assumption that the family moving in is the family that will always be there, in roughly the same configuration, with roughly the same needs. A builder looks at your current household, counts the bedrooms, adds a bathroom for every 2 people, puts a great room in the middle, and calls it done. That process produces a home that fits you perfectly on move-in day and starts quietly misfitting you somewhere around year 4. The T-shaped layout starts from the opposite assumption. It assumes change is coming. It just doesn't know which kind. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in large family residential design, and here's why. There are essentially three change scenarios that multigenerational and large family barndominiums need to absorb over a 10 to 15-year horizon. The first is expansion. A family member returns, a grandparent needs to move in, a young adult can't yet afford to leave. The second is contraction. Children leave, the household shrinks, and suddenly you have square footage that costs money to heat, cool, and maintain, but no longer serves a daily function. The third is reconfiguration. The family stays the same size, but the relationships and needs inside it shift dramatically, requiring spaces to function differently than they were originally designed to. Most layouts handle one of these scenarios adequately. The T-shaped barndominium is the only common configuration that handles all three without requiring structural intervention. Take expansion first, because it's the scenario most families are actually building for even when they don't name it that way. The stem of the T is almost uniquely positioned to absorb a new family unit because it already has the bones of zone independence. Adding a kitchenette to a space that already has its own entrance and its own bathroom cluster is a $14,000 to $18,000 project. Adding the same functionality to a bedroom at the end of a shared corridor in a linear barndominium requires rerouting plumbing, potentially relocating a load-bearing wall, and navigating the kind of construction disruption that turns a renovation into a months-long household crisis. Families who built T-shaped specifically because they anticipated a parent moving in within 5 years report the actual addition process as shockingly straightforward. Families who didn't plan for it and built linear describe the retrofit as the most stressful thing that happened to their household since the original build. Contraction is the scenario nobody wants to plan for because it feels like planning for loss. But empty nester barndominium owners, and there are more of them every year as the demographic wave of families who built big in the late 2010s starts reaching that life stage, consistently report that the T-shaped layout gave them something invaluable when the household shrank, a wing they could close. Not demolish, not retrofit, not sell. Just functionally close, reducing their daily living footprint to the primary horizontal bar while keeping the stem available for visiting family, long-term guests, or eventual rental income that offsets the fixed costs of maintaining a large structure. A 2024 survey of multigenerational homeowners conducted by a residential design research group found that owners with zone-separated layouts reported 52% lower space burden, their term for the psychological and financial weight of maintaining more home than you currently need, compared to owners with open linear configurations of similar square footage. Reconfiguration is the subtlest of the three and arguably the most important. It's what happens when the family doesn't change in size, but changes in dynamic. The adult child who needed to feel independent at 24 needs something different at 31 with a partner and a toddler. The grandparent who wanted proximity in year 1 needs more acoustic separation in year 3 when health issues change their sleep architecture. The T-shape absorbs these shifts because its zones were never rigidly defined in the first place. They were designed as flexible containers, not fixed rooms. But there's a version of the T-shaped layout that engineers specifically warn against, a modification that looks like an upgrade on paper and consistently underperforms in real family living. And it starts with a seemingly innocent question most families ask their builder within the first month of the design process. The question sounds reasonable. It sounds like the kind of thing a smart, budget-conscious family asks because they're thinking ahead. It goes something like this: can we extend the stem? The logic feels airtight in the design meeting. If the stem is what creates zone separation, if the stem is what makes the T-shaped layout future-proof, then a longer stem means more of that benefit. More separation, more zone capacity, more rooms to absorb whatever the future brings. The builder usually nods. Sometimes they even suggest it themselves because a longer stem means more billable square footage. And then the permit gets drawn, the concrete gets poured, and somewhere around the 18-month mark of actually living inside that extended stem, the family starts to notice something that no one warned them about. The house has developed a dead zone. A dead zone is what happens when a secondary wing exceeds the functional threshold of what a family actually uses daily. It sounds abstract until you're the one paying to heat, cool, insulate, and maintain 600 square feet of corridor and rooms that the family passes through maybe twice a week. In a T-shaped barndominium with a properly proportioned stem, typically 28 to 38 feet depending on the overall footprint. The secondary wing stays alive because it's genuinely inhabited. Every square foot has a daily function. But when families extend that stem to 55, 60, even 70 feet chasing the idea of more separation or more future capacity, the physics of daily family life work against them. People naturally gravitate toward the warmth and activity of the primary wing. The extended stem becomes the part of the house where ambitions went to live and daily reality never followed. The engineers who flag this aren't being overly cautious. They're responding to a pattern that shows up consistently in post-occupancy evaluations of large custom barndominiums, the research term for studies done on families after they've lived in a home long enough for the reality to diverge from the intention. A 2023 analysis of multigenerational custom builds across Texas, Oklahoma, and Tennessee found that secondary wings exceeding 40 feet in length showed measurable drops in daily utilization rates within the first 2 years, with families reporting that the unused square footage created both financial strain and a subtle but persistent psychological discomfort. The feeling of living in a home that's slightly too large for the life actually being lived inside it. That feeling compounds. It affects how families relate to their space. And it almost always eventually leads to a retrofit conversation that starts with, "We need to do something with that back section." The correctly proportioned T-shaped barndominium avoids all of this because it's designed around a principle that the best multigenerational architects describe as inhabited density. Not physical density, not cramming people into small spaces. Inhabited density means every square foot of the structure has a genuine daily claim on it from someone in the household. The great room is used every morning. The stem wing bathroom is used every night. The secondary entrance gets muddy boots on it every afternoon. When a home achieves inhabited density, it stops feeling like a structure you're maintaining and starts feeling like a place that's genuinely alive. Families in properly proportioned T-shaped barndominiums describe this quality more consistently than almost any other design type, and they describe it in strikingly similar language regardless of where they built or what their budget was. It feels exactly right-sized. Not too much, not too little. Exactly right for the life being lived. Getting to exactly right-sized requires one conversation that most families never have with their builder because it feels too personal for a design meeting and too architectural for a family conversation. It sits in the uncomfortable middle ground between emotional honesty and structural decision-making. It requires a family to look at how they actually use space, not how they intend to, not how they imagine they will on the best version of a Sunday afternoon, but how they genuinely, honestly, sometimes messily inhabit a home on a random Tuesday in February when nobody is performing for anyone. That conversation changes every dimension of the T-shaped build. And the families who had it before they broke ground share one specific insight that reframes the entire layout decision in a way that makes everything else click into place. The insight isn't complicated, but it requires a kind of honesty that most families are surprisingly reluctant to bring into a design meeting. It's this: space doesn't change behavior. It reveals it. When a family moves into a larger home hoping that the extra square footage will resolve the tension between a night owl teenager and an early rising grandparent, or smooth the friction between two adult siblings who have different standards for a shared kitchen, what actually happens is that the home removes the artificial constraints that were masking those dynamics and lets them run at full volume. The T-shaped barndominium doesn't fix a difficult family. Nothing architectural does. But when it's designed around an honest assessment of who this specific family actually is, not who they're hoping to become once they have more space, it creates the conditions where the good parts of that family have room to breathe and the hard parts have enough separation to stay manageable. This is the conversation that changes the stem length, the entrance placement, the acoustic investment, the kitchenette decision. Not the builder's square footage calculator. Not the cost per foot comparison between configurations. The honest family conversation about which relationships in this household need proximity to thrive and which ones need distance to survive. Those are two completely different architectural briefs, and a builder who isn't asking that question before drawing the first line is designing a generic home for a generic family that doesn't exist, not the specific structure that your specific people will inhabit for the next 20 or 30 years. The families who get the T-shaped layout genuinely right The ones who don't end up with dead zones or retrofit regrets or stem wings that became expensive storage corridors. They almost universally made 3 specific decisions during the design phase that their builders initially questioned. The first was investing in acoustic separation at the junction point where the stem meets the primary horizontal bar. That junction is the most acoustically vulnerable point in the entire structure. Sound travels along the path of least resistance. And in a T-shaped Barndominium, the junction is where the 2 zones meet, which means it's where every sound from the main wing has a direct structural pathway into the stem and vice versa. Double stud walls at that junction, solid core doors, spray foam in the cavity. That package runs between $8,000 and $12,000 and is the single highest return acoustic investment in the entire build. Families who skipped it to save money report regretting it within the first winter. The second decision was giving the stem its own mechanical zone. A separate HVAC zone for the stem wing costs between $4,000 and $7,000 more at build time and saves families an average of $1,800 to $2,400 annually in energy costs by allowing the stem to be conditioned independently based on actual occupancy. When the stem is housing an elderly grandparent who needs consistent warmth, you're not heating the entire primary wing to match. When the stem is temporarily unoccupied because an adult child has moved out, you're not paying to condition empty square footage to the same standard as your daily living spaces. Over 10 years, that mechanical decision pays for itself twice. Over 20 years, it's one of the most quietly significant financial choices in the entire build. The third decision was the one that surprised families the most in retrospect, because it had nothing to do with the stem at all. It had to do with the junction space, the area where the stem meets the horizontal bar, the physical heart of the T. The families who thrived in their T-shaped Barndominiums long-term almost all made that junction space intentional. Not a hallway, not a utility passage, a designed moment, a small library nook, a built-in window seat, a modest flex room with natural light, something that made the transition between zones feel like an arrival rather than a corridor. Something that said, architecturally, you are moving between 2 worlds here, and both of them were designed with care. That junction space is where the T-shaped Barndominium stops being a floor plan and becomes a home. And the families who live inside one that got it right will tell you, unprompted, that it's the part of the house they didn't know they needed until they couldn't imagine living without it. Build the T correctly. Have the honest conversations before the concrete is poured, and what you end up with isn't just a future-proof layout. It's a structure that grows with your family, protects your relationships, and holds its value in ways that simpler configurations simply cannot match. The engineers aren't wrong to call it future-proof. They just rarely explain why in terms that make a family feel it rather than just understand it. Now you feel it. Build accordingly. Thanks for watching. If this was helpful, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. I'd love to hear what you're building. See you in the next one.